This is KCCP, Kansas City's only community programming television station. The following program, produced through the facilities of American Cablevision's KCCP, is the product of an independent producer and does not necessarily reflect the opinions of American Cablevision, its staff, or management.
Good evening once again. Welcome to Entertainment Spectrum. I'm your host, Erwin K Roberets, and tonight our subject of discussion is Sherlock Holmes, and more specifically, the Victorian London of Sherlock Holmes. With me tonight is John Lehman, and I hope I pronounced it right this time.
Congratulations.
Okay, I'm always cutting up names here and there, and he teaches a community course more or less annually on Victorian London of Sherlock Holmes times, and we were fortunate enough to attend some of his sessions, and we'll see a bit of that, and we'll be discussing things Victorian, Sherlockian, and just about anything else we can think of during this next half hour. Welcome to Entertainment Spectrum, John.
Thank you very much.
How long have you been, shall we say, a hobbyist in Sherlock Holmes?
Ooh, about 15 years, I guess, give or take. I don't know exactly when.
What started you off?
I guess I was about 8 years old, and on television I saw Basil Rathbone in a fine film called The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which is still my personal favorite Sherlock Holmes movie. It's a great, well, it's a load of fun from beginning to end.
Well, I know my first experience with Sherlock Holmes was the Basil Rathbone radio adaptations, and the first thing I can remember is the Speckled Band. And I remember I was like 5 or 6, and it scared the bejeebus out of me. And the second thing I can remember is The Final Problem, and my grandmother comforting me is telling me there were stories yet to come.
Yeah, I think you're probably one of the few people that know that Rathbone, I think he made hundreds of these radio broadcasts, some of the original stories, and then Anthony Boucher and Edith Meiser wrote adaptations of stories, and some of them got farther and farther fetched as the radio drama proceeded. But I personally like radio. I think it's a terrific I guess I shouldn't say that on television, should I?
Oh heavens, I promote old-time radio anytime I can get a chance.
Oh, old-time radio is great, and new-time radio can be too. Just
if it's allowed.
The imagination, that takes place up in the imagination, and that's where the fun can be.
All right, and how many times have you taught this community course?
Oh, well, this is the second time, and I don't know how long they're going to put up with it. The first time I guess maybe sooner or later I'll actually have to talk about the Sherlock Holmes stories. The first time I talked about Conan Doyle and the men who created the legend of Sherlock Holmes. Doyle, who actually wrote about the detective, and artists like Sidney Paget, if you've seen illustrated editions, that drew the picture we knew and love. Is Sidney Paget that decided that Sherlock Holmes should wear a deerstalker hat like this one, and you won't find any mention of a deerstalker in the stories, just a cloth cap, and other people like that added their own touches to the canvas.
Well, William Gillette, the actor who did the first major Sherlockian play, who found that only the typical curved stem pipe was the only thing he could talk through effectively.
Well, that's actually a myth. The reason for the curved stem is, oh shoot, I should have brought mine. It's better to illustrate. But if you've got a straight stem pipe, it puts the bowl right up in front of your face. Now, if you're an actor, that's not what you want. You want people to admire your handsome good looks. Well, if you've got a curved stem, it puts the pipe down here. Now, I've tried talking with a curved stem, and I've tried talking with a straight stem, and they're both miserable things to speak through, particularly a big calabash. It goes way out like this, and it's heavy, and your teeth got to hang out like this, and you end up talking like you've got a speech defect. But but the audience can see your face, and of course, as an actor, Gillette liked to smoke. When he wrote the play Sherlock Holmes, he put lots of scenes in where he could smoke. And with his pipe down here below, and a great big pipe that you could see way out, way out in the bleachers, he was in business.
Now let's take a quick stop. Most of the class occurred at the Westport Library. So let's see what's happening out at Westport one night last month. Matches are great for special effects shots in old movies, folks, but I don't smoke. So we're here at the Westport Public Library, and they told us to be on the lookout for suspicious characters going in. And by heaven, we found some. Now, this is a meeting about the first and the best of the gumshoes of all time. So it behooves us American practitioners to go in and take a look. And there we got started on your class. We had a lot of fun there, the various sessions and the various ones of us that were permitted to come by. The first night I was there, you had a young lady discussing the real-life costuming of Victorian men and women, and especially women. Tell us a little bit about her, please.
Well, yeah, Vicki Marshall, she's a very talented freelance artist. I mean, freelancers usually starve to death, but she's got more illustrations than she can handle, more contracts. I love the name of the little company which she's the sole representative of. She calls it Martial Arts. But she's also been a costume designer for Missouri Repertory Theater with Vincent Scarlatti when he got the consignment of designing costumes for Nicholas Nickleby, which is something like 500 outfits. Vicki helped him. I think she designed at least about half of the outfits in Nicholas Nickleby. She designed all the costumes in when Missouri Repertory Theater did The Speckled Band, which is Conan Doyle's only play, successful play that he wrote about his own creation.
And while we were there, she not only read some very interesting treatises on the strange costuming that makes even today's wacko fashions look very free and easy. And she showed us a replica of a Victorian corset and what a woman had to go through to be fashionable there. And folks, you won't get me up in one of those things, or most women that I know today either. Let's take a look at some tape as she shows us what Victorian costuming for real was all about.
It's all laced up in the back here. Now it's made smaller over. This has been taken in and redone because it's been in a lot of shows over the years. But this is basically what it looked like. You start from the bottom, so you get it good and tight, and you work up. And I'll tell you one thing: they do give you good posture. Yeah, I mean, really, if they're not too absurdly tight, they do make you, make you sit up straight and all that stuff.
Years are becoming fashion. Your undergarments are being worn on the outside.
Yeah.
The clothing industry probably doesn't object to that.
And in the late 60s and early 70s, you had a lot of, when you could still find things like this in flea markets and stuff reasonably, a lot of women were wearing like the lingerie pieces, like the slips and stuff as dresses, and I have a couple pieces myself that I've collected, and if I'd been thinking I would have brought them with it. We just wore as dresses, not a whole lot because they're so pretty, but.
That ought to give you some idea of what's been under the costumes of some of the ladies that have played in Victorian dramas recently, especially the two-parter on Jack the Ripper that was run a few weeks ago. And as I believe you said one time, they could serve tea off the back of some of those.
Vicki said that.
Vicki said that?
She's right, though. I think one of the things you might notice, we've all seen Gone with the Wind where Scarlett's being screwed into one of those things, that the lacings in the back, that's a social position. You see peasants you've got, I'm in this tuxedo, you see a peasant who has the buttons in the front. You see, that's because you don't have a butler to put your shirt on for you. But if you're wearing a tuxedo like this old-fashioned tux design, see, these are studs. The button's in the back of this thing, and you either need a gentleman's gentleman to put it on for you or a shoehorn. It was a cultural affectation. So if you see an old illustration of a Victorian lady and she's wearing an outfit with the buttons in the front, generally she's either a servant or a working girl. If she's got the buttons in the back, then she's a lady, and all that means.
I'll take that with a grain of salt. We had some time with Vicki later on and talked to her a little bit about costuming and design. Let's take a look. Now, I'm upstairs in the Westport Public Library with Victoria Marshall, who is a freelance artist, costume designer, costume maker, and any other work she can get her hands on. And you've just been speaking on costumes of the Victorian era. What really interests you about the Victorian era costumes?
Oh my, they're so much the same, but yet they're so varied. All throughout the Victorian era, you know, everybody's very corseted, very stiff, you can't move much, but yet the variety of shapes within that corseted frame just go on forever, from the huge sleeves of the 1890s. I mean, some of them went three yards across, if you can picture that, to the Gone with the Wind era of the huge petticoats and the huge skirts that you had to crush through the door. And there is another whole period of the bustle where, you know, you could serve tea on the back of the lady's dress. So it's just incredibly varied.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, since this is a Sherlock Holmes class that we're attending through the communiversity, let's just say that you work for the Missouri Repertory Theater, I understand. Let's just say that Missouri Rep has a new production of A Study in Scarlet, and they need costumes, and you got picked to get the costumes together. How do you get started on something like that?
First of all, you get started totally immersing yourself in the play. Then I pour through dozens and dozens of books about the period, and, you know, look at, you know, what was done, how, you know, what it looked like, and then take that and the play and design what's going to be right in terms of the look of the fashion of the era, and what's going to be right for the characters in the play, and, you know, for the feel of the play.
And thank you, Vicki. It was lots of fun that night. Not as lively as some things, but then again, gathering information isn't always slam bang. The next week, it was your time to talk about the background for Moriarty.
Yes, and I should explain about that. Moriarty was a character created by, well, it's an old story. Conan Doyle got tired of the popularity of his character. He wanted to write about other things. And so he decided to kill Sherlock Holmes. And in order to kill a great detective, he needed to create a great villain, which he did in the person of Professor Moriarty. I think he made a mistake, because if you want to kill a character, you should write bad stories. That'll kill a character faster than anything. Instead, he wrote a great story full of, it's not a detective story, it's a thriller where Holmes is being chased across London and finally Europe by the Napoleon of crime, who's responsible for all that's evil and most that goes undetected in this great city of London. Now, you create a situation like that, you've got a public howling for more, and Doyle felt the heat for 10 long years before he revised Holmes. Now, what I did in this class was I hypothesized, it's my own fiction, that Moriarty would have grown up in the East End of London, which was the slums. And I used that as an excuse to look at the slums as they existed, the East End, the other half, the other world, a world that's so alien to what we think of the Victorian world, that the East End was often referred to as being as dark as Africa. Well, what did Alfred Doolittle say in Pygmalion? You know, middle-class morality, I can't afford it, Governor.
Mm-hmm. That he did. The movie that I can think that brings to mind the gritty side of Victorian life, and it's black and white, that's The Elephant Man.
Yes, that's a splendid movie.
And it shows the gungy side of life in Victorian London like nothing else I can think of. And it's just as more of an aside to the characters, but it really gets the point across. Now, we have a couple of minutes of your summation on tape.
Oh, you're going to waste time with that?
Well, it was you're telling what Moriarty would have been and wouldn't have been, and as related to Holmes. So let's take a look at that.
Moriarty, to have grown in the East End of London, had to have been as tough as nails. A kid would have had to literally fight his way against the bigger kids, against grown-ups, this kind of brutality. And those that graduated from this school of hard knocks, they were tough. And so I think I've changed my mind since last year about Moriarty as the harmless mathematics professor. I think that when he confronted Holmes at Reichenbach's Falls with physical combat, this was a man well capable of dealing out his share of punishment. Gambling would have been lucrative. It was legal, but it has the same kind of pseudo-legality that it has in America today. You know,
Okay, we've taken Moriarty to small pieces there in dissecting his origins and what have you. And I learned a few terms that had come out of the East End that I was not familiar with. Now, while this class was going on was the 100th anniversary of the Jack the Ripper murders, a little bit past as we get this thing on the air. Now, there have been at least 2 Sherlock Holmes movies concerning Jack the Ripper. There have been 157 other movies concerning Jack the Ripper, TV specials, documentaries, docudramas, and A Partridge in a Pear Tree. What fascinates people so much about Jack the Ripper from your point of
I
view?
think the secret is the name. Is somebody, may not have even been the killer, wrote the London Central News and signed himself, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Now that's a name you don't forget. Vernon P. Oddbody you might, but Jack the Ripper you remember. And it's why these murders have been remembered in lieu of some really more terrible crimes that have occurred over the century. Although the Ripper killings were horrifying. I'm not trying to dilute them in the least.
There have been ones with many more victims, haven't there?
Oh yes, oh yes. An excellent book, and anyone that is interested, is a book called The Complete Jack the Ripper by a gentleman named Donald Rumbelow. It's like rum, you drink it, below, like B-E-L-O-W. Rumbelow is a City of London police officer. His book doesn't have the nonsense. A lot of the Ripper books are fiction masquerading as fact. But Rumbelow takes what is known, gives you the rogues gallery of the suspects. You can choose your own. He doesn't choose. He doesn't know, and I don't know. There's just simply not enough evidence to establish who this guy was. But the book, Rumbelow's book, I highly recommend it. One of the things is he gives a psychological profile of the type of character that could be the killer, and he presents with an actual murderer who killed far more people than the Ripper did. Kind of a one-man reign of terror in Dusseldorf between the wars. A really strange creation.
So there's lots of information, both fact and fancy, about the Ripper. The Ripper is considered by fact and fiction ears to have been such an important thing that I recall in Ellery Queen's novelization of A Study in Terror, where Sherlock Holmes took on the Ripper, that it was the only time I can ever remember that he and Inspector Lestrade ever declared a full-blown truce in any form of Sherlockian fiction.
The Ellery Queen pastiche, written by the Queen team back in the 60s, is a fine novelette. It doesn't pretend to portray the Ripper murders as actually occurred, but when it's such a good novel, who cares? Mm-hmm. That's what fiction's for, is for the fun of it, and it's a superb mystery novel. Unfortunately, it's out of print, and it's hard to get a hold of. I'd recommend it if you can find it. You can sell it for more than you paid for it.
Yeah, almost guaranteed. A Study in Terror is a fine novel. I happen to have 2 editions in my own personal collection. I have the original and a late reprint, which from Magnum Books. If you can ever find one of these stores that has a cluster of Magnum books, for sale, 3 for $1 or something, take a look. You might find it in there. Now, for basically the grand finale of your course, you had a couple of Ripper experts in town and giving a presentation on the Ripper murders. Now, I was busily seeing a Sherlock Holmes movie that night,
He was
folks.
goofing off was what he was doing.
I was seeing Without a Clue with Michael Caine and Ben Kingsley, who were having a heck of a good time being Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
If the class hadn't have been on that time, I would have loved to have seen it with you, because I have seen it since. And by the way, if we might change subject a minute, I agree with your review. That is one fun movie. It's great to see two pros, two fine actors like that go at it at each other so expertly.
Yeah, very well done overall. Now, to get back to the more serious aspects here, we have one clip from our experts, whom you're going to have to identify for me, of them describing one of the victims. And now, who are we going to see speaking here?
The gentleman speaking is Joe Eckridge. He this year he compiled a bibliography of books on Jack the Ripper for a publication called The Canadian Holmes. It's a Sherlockian publication published in Canada. We're all over the world. You can't escape us. And Joe graciously consented to drive all the way from St. Louis to do this. And what he is going to describe is a lady named Catherine Eddowes and what Jack the Ripper did to her.
Okay. Now, first we have his having at the media for glamorizing these prostitutes who were victims.
A description of the victims. Yeah,
yes. Let's have our first look at some real facts about the Jack the Ripper murders.
Made by a left-handed person using a stout-backed knife, such as a cart cutter or a shoemaker might use, with a blade 6 to 8 inches long. The victim was Polly Nichols. She was a prostitute, 42 years old, 5 feet 2 inches, with front teeth missing and a small scar on her forehead. It's another common misunderstanding, I think, with regard to the Ripper's victims. Most of the times when you see movies on the Ripper, and I think it's true for the CBS movie as well, they tend to make out the victims as being fairly young and fairly attractive. And that was definitely not the case. With the exception of Marie Kelly, the last victim, they were all in their 40s. They probably looked closer to 60. Almost all of them had missing teeth and scars and so on. And all of them, including Marie Kelly, were alcoholics. One of them was close to death.
We have one other clip to show you, and if you've got a weak stomach, you might be advised to raid the refrigerator for a couple of minutes. We have a mortuary-type description of one of the Ripper victims, and let's face it, guy, this guy did about as much damage as a Vegematic when he was cutting people up. John, you brought a blade to show us.
Well,
it's not the same blade we realize, but we're talking magnitude here.
This is a Bowie knife, but the Ripper is speculated that he used what's called a post-mortem knife. By the way, a post-mortem knife is a knife that would be used specifically by a physician performing a post-mortem on a dead body. A surgeon would have no more use for a post-mortem knife than a carpenter does for a sledgehammer in driving nails. Now, the reason why I bring this out is this would be about the right length of a post-mortem, about 6 to 8 inches long. It would have a rounded blade, more like the end of my thumb, kind of but very sharp. And it's been speculated, one of the great debates is how much surgical skill Jack the Ripper had, if he had any or none. But the knife itself, from the incisions, the physicians that did it thought it was a post-mortem.
Okay. Now, we have this one last piece of tape, so it's a fairly graphic but not lurid description of one of the Ripper victims.
Address is 6 Fashion Street, Spitalfields. The station was 400 yards from Mitre Square. Didn't have far to go. She was also unlucky because the city police had violated a new ruling. The acting city police commissioner was very determined that he was going to catch the Ripper. And he had given orders that every man and woman seen together after midnight were to be stopped and questioned, and any woman seen alone was to be followed. Had they followed her, they probably would have caught the Ripper. They didn't. And within 45 minutes, she was dead. The body was on its back, and the arms were by the side of the body as if they had fallen there. There was great disfigurement of the face. The eyelids, the nose, the jaw, the cheeks, the lips, and the mouth all bore cuts. There were abrasions under the left ear. The throat was cut across to the extent of 6 or 7 inches. Below the cut was a handkerchief. The abdomen was all exposed. The intestines were drawn out to a large extent and placed over the right shoulder. A piece of the intestines was quite detached from the body and placed between the left arm and the body. The uterus was cut away with the exception of a small portion, and the left kidney was cut out. Both of those organs had been taken away. At the inquest, Dr. Brown testified that the person who inflicted the wounds must have had a good deal of knowledge as to the position of the abdominal organs and the way to remove them. However, he answered that such a knowledge was likely to be possessed by someone accustomed to cutting up animals. And again, when it came to the question of medical knowledge, even the experts, the doctors, were not agreed as to how much, if any.
There we have it, folks. We're a little short of time. We thank John Lehman very much for coming out, and we'll be discussing the more traditional Sherlockian stuff probably sometime in the near future. I'm Erwin K. Roberets, and good night for Entertainment Spectrum.